Wild horses couldn't drag me away from doing today's episode of Life's Potluck Buffet, and it's all about the only wild horse still around in the world. And we're talking at level of species. We're not talking about horses that roam around a lot. There are plenty of those in the world, but this actual horse is a truly wild horse. So stick around for today's wild episode of Life's Potluck Buffet. I'm John Paulus. Thanks for joining me. If you have been enjoying Life's Potluck Buffet, please subscribe. If you've already subscribed, thank you for subscribing. I truly appreciate it. And if you have a Brave browser, you can now contribute basic attention tokens to Life's Potluck Buffet with John Paulus on YouTube. Thank you for your support, and thank you for listening. Oh, yeah. Also, we'll draw a card. Maybe it'll be a wild card. That would be really fitting. Of the 3 wild cards in the Life's Potluck Buffet card deck. And we'll do that at the end of the episode and see what happens. Okay, so I read an article recently that said wild horses have been reintroduced to Kazakhstan, and they are already in places that they were originally in Central Asia and the Central Asian steppes and places like Mongolia and so forth. And so now they're being introduced to other places where their populations existed a long, long time ago, but from which their populations either left or were removed, and now they're being reintroduced in these places, and successfully so because, well, it's where they're from. Now, when I say wild horses, I'm talking specifically about Equus ferus, which is just Latin for wild horse. That's the name of the species. There's only one type of wild horse in the world. The things that you might think of as being wild horses, like mustangs and those ponies and or horses in Virginia and Maryland and on Assateague Island. Sometimes they call them Chincoteague ponies or Assateague horses. Those, though, in some cases, what we call feral, meaning they're out there they roam around in the wild doing their thing. That is, it's different from the wild horse, because wild horse is a specific species that the feral horses of North America, for example, are simply not the same species. They're related, but they split off from wild horses a long time ago. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of years ago, that kind of thing, a long time ago. So they're related, but they're related in a deep past. And so the wild horse actually originated eons ago in North America. At least that's what it seems like. The ones that are back in Kazakhstan, but they migrated to Asia across the Bering Strait nearly 1 million years ago. So there was a land bridge there at the time, right? So that's how they got across. And the same thing happened in they went down to South America as well, and once they got to Asia, they also went to Europe and into Africa, and so the wild horse spread a lot. And a fun fact is that the earliest evidence we have for the wild horse apparently is in the U.S. state of Idaho. That's the earliest fossilized remains we have of the early wild horse that developed in North America. And the horse, eventually, when humans were on the scene, the horse got domesticated. And that is the horse that you're probably most familiar with. Because every horse that you would call a horse is a domesticated version of the wild horse. So, and descends from that. And that is not, it's not a really wild horse, even though there are ones like Mustangs and the Assateague horses that are roam wild and live on their own in the wilds, so to speak. But those horses are actually domesticated horses that, well, got loose and made their way to various places. And all of those horses are actually related to the Spanish horses, horses that were brought over in Spanish ships to North America. And there was a recent study, I think this is a really cool fact. There was a recent study of the DNA of I think it's 500-year-old horse. The remains in Puerto Rico that was they did the DNA analysis of it, and they found that its closest living relatives were the Assateague horses. So that gives you a good sense. The story usually is that there was a ship coming around near Virginia that was headed to Peru with horses, and that there was a shipwreck, and the horses obviously got off the ship and just started living there in Virginia. And it's kind of interesting because horses are really well suited to be living in North America because their ancestors lived in North America originally. So, I talked a little bit about this in the U.S. Camel Corps episode, where because those camel family of creatures also were very much at home in North America in eons past, that they started eating things that normally other animals don't eat because they had evolved with these plants in North America. And so they were somehow familiar to them because of that. And that the same is true with the horses that are ultimately can be traced back to the North American wild horses of eons past. So those wild horses that are in Kazakhstan and Mongolia and areas around there, those horses probably also would do pretty well in North America. I don't know if there's ever been an attempt or a thought to reintroduce the wild horse to North America, but they would do very well, no doubt. The wild horses of now Kazakhstan and Mongolia and the Central Asian steppe are referred to as Przhevalsky's horses. And Przhevalsky was a Russian explorer who really studied very closely the wildlife and the plant life and the life in general the cultural life of Central Asia. And so in European languages, the horse is named after him. And the scientific name reflects that. And the scientific name is Equus Przhevalsky. So, Przhevalsky's wild horse. That sounds like a short story, doesn't it? Now, the wild horses that you might be familiar with, if you're familiar with the North American horses that roam around, which are, as I said, domesticated horses that ultimately were from uh, came off of Spanish ships into North America. Those horses are usually referred to in English as mustangs, and so that's where the if you've heard, I mean, you might be familiar with the Ford Mustang, which that's for a whole different episode. But the Mustangs are the name comes from a Spanish word, a Mexican Spanish word, mestengo, which is a version of a peninsular Spanish word, maybe something like mesteño, and that means of or related to the Mesta. And what the Mesta was in Spain, it was an organization that was basically in charge of and protected the herders and the livestock of places like, well, what is now the kind of central part of Spain. Their really big thing was sheep, though. That was their main thing, was the sheep. And for example, the merino sheep, which produce merino wool, that kind of very fine and soft wool that you might see in sweaters that are sold. That that merino wool was really developed there in Spain by groups connected to these mestas, which they're councils of people who are basically in charge of making sure everything was going okay with livestock and the herds of various types of animals. And so that's where the name Mesteño and then Mestengo and then Mustang comes from. We don't actually know what the etymology of Mesta is. For those of you interested in etymology, I'll tell you, I suspect that it is not the idea of mixing of Mesta. I think people are probably on the right track when they look to the Arabic spoken in the northern parts of Africa and that were spoken in this, part in Spain when the people who were in charge of Spain spoke those languages. And I think that it might be related to the wintering over or the wintering of herds, because shita in Arabic has to do with winter, and there's apparently a term in the northern parts of Africa, meshita, which relates to the wintering over of herds. So I have a feeling that's probably where it comes from, rather than the mixing, the mixta or mesta. But as I said, it's not certain. I would say let's just say we don't know. But that's the story of the mesta. And when you say wild horses couldn't drag me away, you're not actually talking about the wild horses of Central Asia. You're talking about domesticated horses. And where does that come from? Well, probably the origins are in mythology, Greek mythology, actually. The story of a unfortunate guy named Hippolytus. And Hippolytus means either horse tamer or someone who was destroyed by horses. And the pun on that, because hippos is horse in Greek, and the second part, the lutos part of Hippolytos, has to do with, well, let's just say it can mean that he was destroyed by horses, and in the mythological stories, that's one of his outcomes, is that he's dragged to his untimely end as a punishment by being dragged behind wild horses. There are also other forms of the saying that relate to other different kinds of things, but we won't get into those. The point is that it's been, the idea of being dragged by wild horses has apparently been in human consciousness for a very long time, and so now we use it in a very a more casual way, because we talk about that, it's just like you're really eager to do something. Wild horses couldn't drag me away from that concert. I got to go to that concert. That's how we use it today, right? So, well, wild horses cannot drag me away from drawing a card for today. And let's see if it's a wild card. If it's not a wild card, that's okay. 2 cards, there's no pressure. Yellow lemons, blue dumplings, magenta noodles. Cards tell us some things. Oh, it's card 22. Some small action you did ended up being big. Often, what seems like a small thing becomes a big thing, and what seems like a big thing ends up being inconsequential. So tell that story. Start with something you considered absolutely trivial, or just like trace a story back to the most like trivial beginning, and see how that resulted in you encountering a person or an opportunity that led to something big. It's a really fun exercise to do. Give that a try today. Think of a time when something happened because, a really, really small, inconsequential, trivial thing happened, but then it ended up with you encountering a person or an opportunity that became something really, really big for you and even life defining. So think about that today, and I'll see you tomorrow on Life's Potluck Buffet.